Okay, welcome back, guys. So in the last video we left off at where we were styling up our links and trying all sort of um styles, properties that we can use on links. Today we'll be looking at the display property. So before now, I already created this display section of 6 boxes. This is all I did, and I styled it. I just gave it background color and padding in my style sheet. So that this does not keep scrolling down, I'm going to just comment out what we did yesterday so it doesn't start interfering in what we're doing. So I'm just going to comment all of this out. Yes, so this comes up. Oh, okay. Now in our style.css, I already gave the box. That means this each and every one of these background color, margin, and padding. So the first display properties that we'll be looking at are the display properties that you can apply directly to a particular element. And some of these properties include inline. Let's give this inline. So this is what inline does. It makes all the like we spoke about inline elements. If a particular element is a block element originally, you can use display inline to make it an inline element, and that is what we did with these boxes, because originally they were div elements, and div elements are block elements. Okay, that was why it was spanning. If I try to comment this out, it's going to span across its content. Okay, its content with display inline makes the element behave as an inline element. The next one is block, which was the default for div, the div element that we gave before. So this is block. Now we have inline block. What inline block does is the same thing as the usual inline property, but the difference between the inline block and the inline is that the inline does not retain the margin that comes with that element. Okay, but inline block retains the margin with that comes to the element. I gave this I gave this element 0.5 rem. That means 0.5 up, left, sorry, right, bottom, and left. Okay, but if we made this display to be inline, it will not take up the margin across the content. So that's the difference between your inline and your inline block. Okay, we also have display table. You most likely would not be using this, but this is what it does. It doesn't span across its content, but it takes up the space of a block element. I don't know if you understand. It does not span all through. It only fits in the particular width content of that element, but still displays as block. That is like in a tabular form, stacked on top of each other. That's what display table talks about. Now the next display properties that we'll be looking at are the ones that you apply directly to the parent element of that element, just to make the container act as that display property. You understand better when we start applying this particular property. The next display property that we're going to be looking at, the next set of display properties we'll be looking at, is the flex and grid. And the reason why we're looking at it separately is because it is mostly applied to the parent element. So let's go to our index.html. Now I created a parent element for these boxes, and I gave it an ID of display section. So let's try to reference it in our style.css. So now, because we gave it an ID of display section, we're going to be using the hash sign. The hash sign is what you use to reference your IDs. So hash display section. Oh, okay. Let's give this a background color so we'll know what space it occupies. Under height, let's say a height of 600 pixel. Yeah, okay, that works. Okay, now the first one we'll be looking at is the flex. That's display flex. What the display flex does is that it enables a flex content for all of its direct children, thereby making them span either horizontally or vertically depending on the direction you put it in. Okay, so let's try that out. Display flex. So by default, I need to give these boxes height. Sorry, height of two. Let's do 30%. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Now, before it was spanning on top of each other, the moment I gave the parent element display flex, you could see that they kind of changed direction to span horizontally from vertically. Now, why that happened is because by default, the direction of all your flex items, by the way, in Flexbox, you call all the children elements flex items. So now, by default, the direction of the flex items, once you give a parent element the display flex, the direction is row. They span horizontally, and flex items try to fit in one line. In most cases, they try to fit in one line. Now, that takes us to flex direction. Flex direction establishes the main axis of a flex box. In a flex box, just think that we have the main axis and the cross axis in a flex box, and they are usually perpendicular to each other. So you have the row, that means the horizontal, and the vertical. So whichever one that you state as your flex direction is your main axis. Please take note of that. So yeah, as I was saying, flex direction establishes the main axis, thereby defining the direction the flex items are placed in a flex container. So now this by default is um in a row direction. We can decide to change the main axis to column by declaring flex direction column. Exactly. So they stack on top of each other in the horizontal direction. So in the vertical direction rather, they stack on top of each other in the um vertical direction. Now another thing you can do with your flex direction is that you can reverse the directions in cases where you do not want your flex items to span from, let's say, left to right. You want it to span from right to left. All you can do is just change your row to row reverse, and that's why I named all of the boxes so we'll know how it moves, so don't get confused. So now we have from 6 to 1. That's for row reverse. We can also do, let's do column, then switch to column reverse. Now this is the right direction for column. Now let's change to column reverse and see. Yes, so it spans in the opposite direction. Now another property that we need to look at is flex wrap. Flex wrap, what flex wrap does is that it tries to help us fit in our flex items properly, because I stated earlier that by default flex items would normally want to fit in into one line. Let's see what I mean by that. um oh, sorry, no, let's change this. Let's give this a width of 200 pixel. Then let's change, does it make, okay, then let's change this to row. Oh, okay, sorry, let's change this to row. So as we can see, the flex items still maintained that one line. They didn't try to fit in into the container, the parent element. So what that is where flex wrap comes in. Flex wrap helps you to allow the flex items wrap properly as needed. So let's do flex wrap. Let's do wrap. So that way they wrap into the container like they should. Okay, in the other values that you can use with your flesh wrap, in cases where you do not want them to wrap in the default direction, you can always reverse it. So you can do wrap reverse, and that switches it up for you. Per line it does the reverse of what the line used to look like. So here we have 1 2 3 4 5 6, like that, instead of 1 2 3 4 5 4 5 6. Okay, so the next thing to look at quickly is the shorthand. There's a shorthand that helps us declare these two properties that we just did. It's a shorter form of doing this. So let's just say flex flow. It's called flex flow. So all of these that we stated before, we can just change this to row, and let's do wrap, just wrap. So this is a easier and faster way of declaring what we just did now. So now these are the main properties that you apply to the parents of your flex items. Now there are other properties that you can apply to the children element, that is the flex items themselves, in cases where you might need them. So now the first of this property is our flex grow. So in cases of expansion and all of that, sometimes you might want one of your flex items to be bigger than the rest. What you can do is, so let's target one of these boxes. Let's go to index.html. I already gave this extra classes of extra unique classes to each of these divs, so we can always reference them separately. So now let's target block box 2. Okay, so we say box 2. Sorry. So now we want box 2 to grow twice the size of the rest. So we are going to say flex grow to. So as we can see, it tries to pick up the size of the rest, but twice the size of the rest, because we gave it flex grow 2. Now what happens is that it only takes up that space if there's enough space for it to occupy, to be twice the size of the rest. Okay, for example, if I decide to give it flex grow 5 here, it won't go more than the flex basis can allow it. That is the space around the flex items can allow it. Okay, if we okay, that takes us to flex basis. What flex basis is the size of the flex items originally, without having flex grow or flex shrink or anything, and the remaining spaces are like distributed evenly amongst the rest of the flex items. So let's look at flex shrink. Flex shrink is like the direct opposite of flex grow. In cases whereby you need to minimize your flex box and um you want a particular box to shrink more than the rest, that's where flex shrink comes in. Okay, so those are the um those are the properties that you can apply to the children elements in a flex box. Now there are other properties that helps with arrangement and alignment in flexbox. We have two. We have the align content and justify content. Now, earlier on I stated that the flex direction the value of the flex direction that you declare establishes the main axis. So now in this situation we let's take this sorry let's take this back to let's just take it off. Okay, um okay, flex rule is still working, and that's fine. Let's give this no wrap. Okay, so we said that the flex direction establishes the main axis, and in this situation, in this case, our flex direction is row. So that means our main axis is row. If you need to align or arrange any of the flex items in the main axis, that is the row direction, what you use is justify content. Justify content arranges or align flex items related to the main axis, while the align items or align content aligns and arranges flex items in the cross axis, that is the opposite of the main axis. Here we have row to be our main axis, so definitely the cross axis is going to be column. So let's try to arrange this in our main axis. I'm going to comment out this one so it doesn't conflict with our styling. So what I'm going to do now, and if you're going to use justify content or align content, you apply these properties to the parent element. If you're going to do align self and justify self, you can apply it to the to the child element, that is the flex items. So now let's do justify content. Justify content, there are various values that you can use for justify content. You can use flex stats, or you can just say stats. It works either ways. So flex stats means all of the items are stacked to the beginning of your flex container. All of them move to the beginning of your flex container. If you do flex end, all of the um all of the flex items move to the end of your flex container. You can as well do center, they move to the center. You can do space between, that is the spaces around the flex items are placed between each and every one of them. You can do space around, that is the spaces are distributed around the flex items. You can do space evenly, that is the spaces around the flex items are even, equal spaces around all of the flex items. So these are the values you can use with justify content. Now align content is going to do just the same thing with the flex items, but in the cross axis direction, in the cross axis, which is the column direction. So let's try to do some of that. Let's try to use some of the value items. Hi Rem, I think that's something I'm speaking in phone in code. Alright, align items. We can do start. That takes it to the beginning of the flex container. If we do end, it takes it to the bottom of the flex container in the column direction. If we do center, it takes it to the center. If we do um baseline, but I don't think this should work in this case because we do not have a baseline. But baseline is when you have text, it's, takes the line by which all the text starts from. So it's arrange your items in that line. Okay, so that's what align items does. Now, in cases whereby you have content in your um let's just take this to the center. So in cases whereby you have content in your um flex item, that is a child element having another child element, okay, you can use align self on it. It arranges it does the same thing to what it does the same thing align items do to the parent, to the child. So it just arranges everything within that element space rather. Okay, so the next the next property we'll be looking at is the display grid. Just like flex, you apply display grid to your parent element as well, to the parent element. So let's try to, let me just clear this out. Yeah, okay, okay, I think we're good. So sorry, we're not good yet. What's happening? Okay, now in this case, instead of flex, we're going to be giving it grid. Now, what grid does is it allows you to arrange components in columns and rows. Well, it sounds like flex, but the difference is that you don't specify direction directly here. You use grid columns and grid rows. You have to specify grid columns and rows to arrange the components in the direction that you want. Now, the if you set a particular element to be grid, it establishes like a new formatting context, a new grid formatting context for its children rather. So just like flex, what if you the moment you give flex to a particular container, that particular container becomes a flex container. Okay, the same thing with grid. The moment you give a parent element the display grid, that particular container becomes a grid container. So um whatever styling you want to give the descendants of that element, has to go along with the grid formatting context. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be looking at, some of the properties that we can apply to the parent element, is the grid template rows and the grid template column. So let's come up with, let me give this so that we don't get confused. Okay, now we have the grid templates. Let's start with rows. Now you can specify um the how the rows of your grid is going to look like, with space separating each values. Okay, so what grid template rows does is it defines the rows of the grid with a space separating the list of values. So the value that you give this grid template rows will determine how the grid items are arranged within this within the grid container. Okay, so if you give let's imagine you give this grid template rows 1 FR. That means you are saying the first grid row should take like the chunk of the grid container. Because there are 6 rows now, if you're going to give one fraction, it should be 6, so that if you want it to be even, that's if you want it to be even. If you want to do that, you can just do repeat 6 comma 1 FR, and that way it's going to like distribute your rows and the space that between your rows. Another way to just do this is you can just say auto, so nothing changes because it helps you calculate, it automatically calculates the fraction each grid item should take in your row direction. The same thing applies to your columns, grid grid template columns. We can say, let's say repeat 2 1 FR. So this tells your browser that, okay, in the column direction, that is where I want to have 2 columns, let each grid items be arranged in 2 fractions of the grid container. So that's what happened here. You can as well increase this. If I decide to change this to 3, it's still going to change. So it's going to take up the number of fractions that you give it. I hope you remember that this repeat 1 FR is the same thing as doing this. That's like just a faster way of doing it. Now, if I want to repeat this exact format with grid but not use the grid template rows or grid template columns, I can use grid template area. And how do I do that? What grid template area does is that it gives you like a visual representation of how the grid items can be arranged, but with grid area value. Let me type it out so you get what I'm trying to say. Grid template areas. Here you define, oh sorry, not none. Sorry, you define how it should look like in the grid container directly inside your CSS. So for example, I'm going to do box 1. We want box 1 to be in this position, box 2, sorry, box 3. Okay, next line, you want box 4 to be under box 1, box 5 under box 2, and box 6 under box 3. So you have it easy like that. It's like it kind of helps you to just do it, to just put whatever you have visualized inside code. Okay, and what you need, another thing you might need to do sometimes when you want to access a particular grid item, when you have declared your grid template areas, is all of these declarations, all of these values that you've given, you have to declare the grid area that is pertaining to each grid item. So what you're going to do is each grid item, let's say dot box 1, you have to oh sorry, this is supposed to be outside of here. Okay, so now we're going to say box 1 grid area, as in the grid area it occupies is named what? Is named box 1, because that is what we use to define it inside our grid template area. Okay, You can do this for all of the remaining. Let me just do that. I'm just going to duplicate this 6 times, then change this. Okay, so now that we've defined each grid area, um so in cases whereby I want to remove one of these boxes, I don't want it anymore in my grid content, I don't want it to follow um this grid template area, I can just say, okay, I want block 2 to span from the middle to the end, so I can just change this to block 2. That way 3 will be removed and block 2 will take the space of 3. You can do that um for any of them. Let's say this is, you can change this to block 6, 5 will definitely be removed. So that is how grid template areas work. It kind of helps you to easily picture how you want your grid container to be using declared grid areas, defined grid areas rather. There's a shorthand for all of this. So instead of going through this, you can use grid template. So a shorthand that helps you easily use your grid template rows, grid template columns, and grid template areas is the grid template. So if you don't want to go through the long process of writing all of that, you can just use grid template, then declare the values of your rows, columns, and areas. So now the next thing we want to talk about is the column gap and row gap. So let's just let's comment this out. Then let's comment this out and we open this. So in a situation whereby I remove the margin that I gave my boxes here, see that there's no margin anymore. There's a way you can declare gaps in grid. Okay, depending on where you want to give your gap. If you want to do column gap, if you do column gap and give it 10 pixel, that way you can specify how wide or how shallow, I mean smaller, you want the gaps between your columns supposed to be. You can also do row gaps, but because let me try to reduce the height of this so we can see how column gaps work. Okay, 50, that's too small, into 100. Okay, so if I do row gaps now, we can see the effect here. So that is how you specify gaps in grid. And we also have shorthand for this. You can just say gap and you can specify for your row, and let me just comment this out. Just say 10 pixel, 20 pixel. So it works the same way as what we've done before. It's just a shorter way of doing it, and a cleaner way of doing it. So just as we have aligning and arrangement in flex, we have the same thing in grid. The same way justify items work, justify content work, it does the same too um in grid. So let's make this 500 pixel. Then let's make this repeat 6 times. 6 1 okay. So now let's try to use justify items. So if we take it to center, the items, each item have a particular space they occupy. The items go to the center of their own personal space. If we do justify content, it goes to the center of the content. If we do, let's go back to item. You can do end. Oh, what am I doing? You can do end. You can see here it comes down. You can do start. It moves up. You can do stretch. Oh, oh, items. Sorry. You can do start. It goes to the beginning. You can do end. In the row direction, justify content in grid system aligns in the row direction, that is horizontally. You can do stretch, so it takes all the space it's supposed to take with stretch. The same with align items. Align items arrange in the vertical direction. You can do end. Let's do end. So it goes down. You can do center. You can do start. You can also do stretch. So that is how it also works in grid. You can also combine the style of justify items and align items together by using place items. It's like a shorthand as well. You just give one value to just as I have stretch now. If I give place content, sorry, let's do place content. So it combines the effect of both justify content and align content. If we do center, it centers them in both direction. Okay, so I think that's that about grid. So that's that about today's lesson. I hope you learned one or two things. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye.